Both Nissan and GMC has both unveiled the new GMC Yukon, which is a mid-cycle refresh, and then the brand new 2025 Nissan Armada. So in this video, I want to talk about which one I would personally buy if I was in the market for both of these. I think they both start at around $60,000 to $70,000 for the base model, but then if you go up to the Denali, for example, the Yukon, that's going to be over $100,000. But the cool thing about the Armada here is that we now get a Pro 4X trim, and that makes it a whole lot more desirable in my opinion. So we're gonna have a look at both of these from our front, side, and rear in Photoshop, compare the two, and also the interiors, which the Armada was in desperate need for a refresh for the interior. But before we do that, let's have a look at these articles from Car and Driver. Starting with the Nissan Armada here. 2025 Nissan Armada ditches the V8 but promises more capability. Now with a turbo V6, add the Pro 4X trim, you have air suspension and a locking rear differential, making it, if you put the right wheels and tires on here, and it comes with some pretty rugged tires stock, but you can bump it up a little bit more if you want to. This is going to be a pretty decent off-roader. So you have a twin turbo 3.5 liter V6, 425 horsepower and 516 pound-feet of torque. And as I said, the new model should start at around $60,000. Now, it's a little bit longer than the previous model, giving you more interior space. It still offers either 7 or 8 passenger capacity. 8,500 pound max towing, as is the same as before. You have a 9-speed automatic for the Armada. Rear wheel drive is standard. However, you can of course option with all-wheel drive or 4-wheel drive, which to me, if you're gonna buy a big SUV like this, it would just make sense to have it all-wheel drive at least. So for the Pro 4X trim here, they really went out of the way to make it feel off-road worthy. You have a different front and rear bumper. They completely redesigned for the Pro 4X, give it a better approach and departure angle. It also has skid plates, Yokohama Geolandar all-terrain tires, and red accented tow hooks. Of course, we need those red tow hooks if it's going to be a proper off-roader. Dual 12.3-inch screens in the interior, acting as a digital gauge cluster, and the infotainment screen, of course. And the higher trims comes with a 14.3-inch infotainment screen. I personally am totally fine with 12.3. I think that is big enough. You have wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Base price, as I said, around $60,000, and then we go up to the Platinum Reserve and the loaded Pro 4X, around $80,000, which is also around the price where you get into the Yukon AT4. So Yukon AT4 versus Armada Pro 4X, that is a pretty interesting comparison. So moving on to the GMC Yukon here. It gets a refresh for 2025, include a more desirable diesel engine, which is something that I think is going to sell really well. If you can get the diesel with the AT4, that would be a pretty cool spec for the new Yukon. The full-size SUV also has a restyled interior that gets rid of the push-button shifter, which was a feature that a lot of people complain about. It was very weird to use that push-button shifter that you had in the pre-facelift here, and adds a massive 16.8-inch touchscreen. Now, normally, when we have big screens like this, the problem becomes it just does not suit the interior. It doesn't fit in the interior. But this time, for the Yukon, I actually think it looks pretty decent with the integration. We're going to look at that in a minute. So this is only a mid-cycle refresh. The updated diesel 3-liter inline-6 makes 305 horsepower, up from 277, and 495 pound-feet of torque, which is also up from previously. It will reach dealership later this year, with pricing expected to be announced closer to its on-sale date. You have a fresh new face here with lighting elements that take inspiration from the upcoming GMC Sierra EV, and is connected to a 10-speed automatic transmission. The standard powertrain is the 355 horsepower 5.3-liter V8, so the Yukon, compared to the Armada, still gets the V8, and it also has the 420 horsepower 6.2-liter V8 carries over unchanged. You have the base trims, the SLE and the SLT are replaced by new entry-level elevation model, and now the off-road oriented AT4 gets fancier features with the arrival of, you have an AT4 Ultimate now, which adds a little bit more luxurious features to the regular AT4, such as height adjustable air suspension, 20-inch wheels with all-terrain tires, and the top spec AT4 has full grain leather covering all 3 rows of seat. Now here you can see the interior, and we're going to talk more about this in Photoshop in a minute, but I think even if it's 16.8 inches, It's a massive vertical TV on the dash here. I still feel like the integration feels pretty decent, and thankfully it looks like we still have some physical buttons down here, because you still have a physical volume knob, for example, and you have static menu at the bottom with the climate control settings. So this to me is still a great interior, even with this massive screen. And a physical row is included of physical toggle switches for various settings. Now, the way GMC separates the different trim levels is that they have a unique grille for each trim level. And the top trim have headlights and taillights that play an animation when the SUV is locked and unlocked. Seems to be a pretty common feature or a trend these days. You also have an additional thermal night vision that displays an image in the gauge cluster, and this one can tow up to 84,000 pounds. The GMC Yukon is expected to reach dealership later this year, and we don't really have pricing for it yet, but it's going to be very close to the new Armada. So with that said, let's jump into Photoshop here. Let's have a look at these designs, because I think it's a pretty interesting comparison, because I think what Nissan did here with the refresh is they sort of maybe tried to make it look a little bit more American. And I said that when I made the video of the Armada, that they felt inspired by the GMC Yukon. You can clearly see that here in these designs. First of all, the front end. You can see that both of them have this starting point up top, which I absolutely love for big SUVs like this. It just makes it feel stately, and a purposeful front end where all the graphics start at one single line, and below this line, this is where you have all the graphics. I love the refresh of the GMC Yukon. It just feels so much cleaner than previously, and I love that we have a bunch of chamfers going in here and some more hand feeling in the design. It feels like this was sketched up by hand and not just straight starting point, you know, in a 3D software and just starting to model it, and that's how they created this design. This still has a lot of automotive feel to it, and we have these upswings in the lower section, which is different from what we have in the Armada. Here it points upwards, and in the Armada you can see that it points downwards in this area. Still looking very good. Red tow hooks here, of course, fog lights down here as well. Specific AT4 grille for this trim level. I like that it is blacked out. It's a massive grille, but overall I think it suits the overall design of the front end. I love the new headlights here as well. Not sure if we can call these bumper headlights, but we do have the main headlights bulbs integrated right here with a very strong C shape. That is no mistaking this for anything else than a GMC Yukon. Now, looking at the new Nissan Armada here, this is what I'm talking about. You can see how similar these designs are. The new Armada still has even has a C shape for the daytime run lights, and we also have the same starting point up top, looking great. Blacked out grille for the Pro 4X trim. And I do prefer the GMC's daytime run light for the simple reason that they have some dynamic feeling in it. You can see that it's thicker here and then goes into thinner here. We have the same thickness up top, while the Nissan Armada has very thin LEDs. And I wish they just fattened them up a little bit to give this a more confident look in the front end. These LEDs, daytime run lights here, they look a little bit too thin for my taste. Even though it still looks good, it kind of connects it to the Frontier's front face with the daytime run lights. And we have the same situation here where we have the headlights sitting inside of this lower C, pretty much exactly what we have in the GMC Yukon. So I do think Nissan wanted to make this feel, maybe, I'm not sure, but it feels to me that they wanted to make this feel a little bit more American. We still have some nice chamfers down here and a beautiful integration overall of the front end graphics, the top half graphics up here. Love that we have the same starting point up top as well. Red Nissan logo for the Pro 4X, skid plate down here, and of course we need to slap on these red tow hooks at the bottom. Fog lights integrated in the lower section. It looks like, I mean, this Armada, I think it's a great refresh, both the interior, which was in desperate need of a refresh, but also that they added the Pro 4X, because I want to see more big SUVs like this have this off-road capability. This down here is not the Pro 4X. I just wanted to throw this in as well to show you the different trim of the Armada. But looking at the side view here of the Yukon, not a lot of changes from the previous pre-facelift. We'll still have a very sharp shoulder line right here. I love that it connects from the corner of the headlight into the corner of the taillight. This is a cool feature as well, with this shark fin going up in the, what is it, C-pillar in this case, with this beautiful line cutting in here and creating a little bit of a sharp edge down here. Overall, I think the proportions of this, it looks solid. It looks like a proper unit, this design. I like that we have these lines at the bottom cutting in from the side into the rear bumper, has a clear connection here. This area, what this does is, you know, it carves out some of this big volume. Since this is such a big SUV, we want to visually try to make it feel a little lighter, and they did that by adding this line here at the bottom. Cool wheels and tires, all-terrain tires for the AT4 model. Now looking at the Armada here, beautifully done, and I've said this in the specific video about the Armada, that this feels like a proper modernization of the old Armada, because look at this D-pillar here. This is a clear modernization of what we had going on in the old one, which was a very specific and unique D-pillar. As soon as you looked at the side view of an Armada, you knew exactly what it was, thanks to the D-pillar here. They call this a floating roof because you can see that it is blacked out. It has this section here that sort of cuts or separates the roof from the rest of the body. I think that looks very, very cool. Shoulder line very clean. We have the same sort of situation down here as we have in the Yukon, where they cut out some of this volume at the lower section. However, it does not continue into the bumper like it does on the Yukon here, but it still looks very, very cool. Not the biggest fan of these wheels and tires. I would personally, if I were getting an Armada, 100% I would go for the Pro 4X, and I would probably switch these wheels out as well, even though they are pretty off-road capable. You can see that they sit too far in the body. I want to have them sit flush here and just beef the tire size up a little bit. Now, last but not least, before we jump into the interior here, the changes that I like about the Yukon is specifically in the rear. They didn't just facelift the front end, which is the case in so many variants when a manufacturer facelift their cars. They focus 100% on the front end, but we do have some new styling features here. The taillights are brand new, and I love that we have this beautiful thick LED in the rear, looking super nice and crisp. This feels like a higher quality LED than we had before, because this has a continuous, the glow of the LED is continuous across the entire length of it, which as before, it kind of faded in some areas and looked a little strange. But here, this feels so much cleaner. I like that it cuts in to the tailgate here as well. And we have the exhaust pipes, quad exhaust pipes down here at the bottom. Love that they are visible still. I feel like that is a trend that is slowly coming back to show off the tailpipes. And another thing that I appreciate here is that we don't have the wiper situated right here and just ruining the clean rear end. Instead, it's probably, I'm pretty sure it's housed out here underneath the top spoiler, which definitely cleans up the overall design. Now, looking at the Armada here, they decided to go with the trend of the decade here for the Armada, slap a light bar into the rear, which I guess is totally fine, but in this case, I don't know, it just doesn't feel like the light bar feels like it has a nice connection to the rest of the graphics. This feels almost like an afterthought that they just wanted to jump on this trend. But looking at the taillights here, and I wanted to show you this because this is another reason why I think they were inspired by the Tahoe or the Yukon here, because look at the design of the taillights. Looks very similar to what we have going on in the Yukon here. It's actually thicker in the rear. So in the rear, we do have this dynamic feeling that I'm looking for in a taillight for a big SUV like this, but they didn't do it in the front end. So this type of styling or idea is exactly what I wanted to see up here in the front, to add some thickness to some pieces of the daytime run lights in the front end. But thankfully we do get that in the rear. However, we don't have the exposed tailpipes like we have on the AT4 down here at the lower section. I would like to see some squared off tailpipes sitting down here, because I feel it would suit this specific SUV to have something like that and just be proud of the powertrain that it has, even though it doesn't have the V8 anymore. Just slap some tailpipes onto the rear. Now, last but not least, this interior for both of these. So I do think this is probably the 14.3 updated infotainment screen for the Armada here. And this, as I said, if you look at the old one, it just looked like a design that came straight out of the 90s almost. It was just so dated. And this looks 1000% better, bringing it into 2025 with this design. This is a decent integration of the infotainment screen and the gauge cluster here, because it has this bay which it sits within. So it feels like the designer at least put a little bit of effort into making the gauge cluster and the infotainment screen feel welcome in the interior. We have a brand new steering wheel as well. Looks to have these touch sensitive buttons here, but thankfully they're still buttons. And if we look at the infotainment screen here, we do have climate settings down here, so I do think you have the option to either adjust them with the pixels here, but thankfully we still have a huge, beautiful control panel down here where you have all the settings for the control panels being in different types of buttons and toggles. And this is fantastic for 2025. And I do think, I hope at least, that this is something that is coming back to more manufacturers. Looking at the Yukon here, still 16.8, I do believe this infotainment screen is. It's just one of the biggest in the business. And when I heard that, I thought that this is going to be very weirdly integrated in the interior. But when I look at it now, it actually feels pretty well integrated, because it sits in the same line up top here as the gauge cluster. And the gauge cluster still has a beautiful, nice housing to it, a cave which sits within deep in the dash, which is beautiful. And this has this waterfall design just flowing from the top of the gauge line of the gauge cluster down here into the bottom. So I do think this integration is still pretty good. And in addition to that, thankfully for the Yukon for 2025, we still have some physical toggles, at least, even though they're all the same. I would like to see a dial for the temperature and these type of toggles for the fan speed, but now we have toggles for everything. But it's still a lot better than just having everything be pixelated. So we do have a big screen, but in addition to that, we still have a beautiful gauge cluster inside of a housing and physical buttons. So I am not going to complain about any of these interiors. I think both of these refresh are very well done by both manufacturers. If I were to pick one, I just like the styling of the GMC Yukon better than the Nissan Armada, even though I do appreciate that the Armada looks like a modernized version of the previous generation. But when it comes to the overall looks, and also I would say the interior, I did not expect me to choose an interior with a 16.8 inch screen. But as I said, the integrations are there, and we still have the physical buttons. So for me, I'm gonna go with a GMC Yukon 84 in this case.